Hi, I'm Jess.
And I'm Bryn.
Welcome to another week.
The lines between business and life aren't always clear, especially when you're building something from the ground up.
At the Double Digest, we're talking about what it really takes to run a brand, navigate challenges, and show up fully, both in work and in life.
Let's dive in. Welcome back to another week.
We're excited to dive in. This week we were in Vancouver.
Yes, we're together, which is so nice.
We get together probably about once a month, but not always. And this trip's particularly lovely because Vancouver is in like full spring bloom, so it's so gorgeous outside.
Yeah, and it's been nice to have the time to reconnect and also to like be outside, and feels like a bit of a new chapter, which is nice.
So we have some exciting things to dive into. We are visiting Vancouver because we were a part of the BC Business 30 Under 30. So they hosted a dinner kind of awards evening at some like a founder's home, which was really special. Bryn, why don't you tell us a little bit more about it?
Yeah, so these events I think are always great because you're getting to meet so many people. So like my goal going into it is always to talk to, as many people as possible, but also to have more in-depth conversations, not just like surface level small talk, to, really build some relationships. One thing that I think has been helpful in doing that, especially for some of these events, is asking questions during like the Q&A. So just making sure that you always have a question prepped so that as soon as you get into the question period, you can raise your hand. And the last couple of times I've asked a question, it's worked out well because I guess the question was so like vague or broad that then the speaker asked me to like explain what my business was. So that was nice because you kind of get a bit of a pitch in there.
Yeah.
So that I've found has been a good strategy. And then the other thing I did, like even when I was back at school and recruiting, was just like trying to stay until the end, even if you're tired, because sometimes, the best conversations happen at the end, less people. So we also got to sit next to some really awesome founders that, had a lot of insights to leave with us. So I think, it was good overall and felt like a productive use of time.
Yeah, I feel like it was really inspirational, and it's always great to hear founders who've been through the entire journey and connect to, the same struggles and how they overcame them, their perspective on business. So I always find that really great to hear about.
And the other thing that's nice about founders in your current stage is that you tend to then see people at events. So, once you've seen somebody at one event, you kind of have a familiar face at subsequent events. So there are some people at this event that we'd met before, and that always just makes it feel a bit more comfortable because you know them.
Yeah, and right before we went to the event, we did a fireside chat with LOI, and LOI is League of Innovators, and it's an accelerator program. We've been part of both their Labs batch and their Boost, and they do a really great job of amplifying founders. So we also got to meet some of the founders who went to the event later that night, earlier, and we just kind of had chats about non-dilutive funding. That was the main focus, but lots of people just asked questions, and it's also a nice moment for us to recognize how far we've come because we have some really tactical answers now for people, and not that long ago we were on the other side of that conversation.
Yeah, it was a really nice way to connect. Joel, who leads it, is such a great connector and somebody that I really look up to, and especially in terms of creating that network and building community. And I feel like he's just always so dialed in when he's talking to you and really thinking about what you need help with and how he can help you. And I think that's a really good learning in how to, build community, is making sure you're always adding value to the people you're talking to and finding ways to give back.
Yeah, 100%. And he gave us so many great introductions and possibilities for potential investors, which is always one of the best things about your network, right? Is that if you get connected to one person, they'll connect you to 2 more people and 3 more people, and that's how you can learn about advice or get investment and, just grow exponentially.
Yeah, one of the things I've been thinking about a lot is that idea of surface area of luck, and the more you can create a surface area for luck to happen, the more likely it is to happen. So trying to, the network effect works with the more people that you connect to. So the more people you connect to, the more people you're now 6 degrees of separation from, and just increasing the surface area for luck. And that means going to events and putting yourself out there and telling people what you're looking for. So I think that's been really helpful too. A founder friend of ours, Serena, was sharing different types of luck. So the 4 types of luck are blind luck, and I think that's what most people tend to think of. So this is luck that you can't control. It's just how things are. Then there's luck of uniqueness, which is a lot more in your control. It's about your reputation and your unique skills and how you're adding value. Then there's lack from awareness. So just as you build more experiences, you're able to notice luck. And I would kind of put that in the network piece too. Like the more you've laid a foundation for luck, the easier it is to be there. And then luck for motion, which is just basically that idea of
like momentum.
Yes, of momentum.
Nice. Yeah, I feel like that's similar to like the idea of like universal intervention, or like if you're being like you're manifesting, it's kind of the same idea where it's like you can't be laying on your couch and just thinking about it and like waiting for your dream man to like knock down the door. Like you have to go out and like go to the bar and like put yourself on online dating apps. Like you need to do that work to put yourself in the position to like find what you're seeking and have the opportunity that you're looking for.
Yeah, and being patient to know that if that's not the right fit, then, you know, maybe that's at least getting you closer to the fix. You know, it isn't the right fit, or you've, met somebody who knows somebody. So, yeah, I think those are some ways that can help.
Yeah, it's been a really great week for connections. And yeah, like I feel like as a founder, you have like good weeks or bad weeks, or good days and bad days where there's, like all of a sudden a lot of momentum, or just all of a sudden a good feeling, and you feel things kind of like shifting in your favor. And I feel like it's felt like that kind of week. We also found out that we've moved on to Venture Reveal Day, which is a part of the Next AI program. So there's one more sort of gateway, and they select a handful of companies that get to present as a representation of all of the Next Canada cohort in front of VCs and angels. So it's a really wonderful opportunity. So that was really exciting.
Yeah, we had a couple pitches this week because we also had the Okanagan Angel Summit. Both of those pitches were 3 minutes, and 3 minutes is pretty tight on time. And so when we're looking at our 3-minute pitch, it's always a bit of a balance between like you want to be able to tell a story, but you also need to fit in as many facts as possible. So you have to decide what are the most important things for your business. Like I feel like in a 10-minute pitch, you can very much follow like those core 10 slides that, you know, if you search up Guy Wagasaki or the Sequoia Capital method, like there's 10 slides you usually have in, but in a shorter pitch, you really have to think about what's the story that I'm telling. What are the main facts and figures that support this story that somebody can walk away from? And then always thinking too about if somebody listened to this, would they be able to explain it to somebody else? And we've talked about that on the podcast before about the power of simplicity. And sometimes simpler is, or almost all the time simpler is better. So figuring out kind of what's that story, and how do you distill everything that you want to say into just the basics?
And in those short pitches, it's so important. Like the main thing that you're trying to do is spark enough interest to get to the second round. Like it's not often that a 3-minute pitch will be the end. So it's like just piquing enough interest that they want to hear more. Like it's sort of like the
teaser.
Amuse-bouche. Yeah. I think another thing that we've learned with shorter pitches, if there's a hard cutoff, which I feel like is becoming more and more common, because otherwise there's like no point in even putting a timeline because some people go so over. So we've had some like really hard stops. So if you're prepping for those types of pitches, prep to 2 minutes and 45 seconds to give yourself enough time to breathe. And if you're nervous and you talk slower, or if you stumble, you can actually get to your last line, because that can be just like the worst feeling, or maybe you don't get to communicate all of the points that you wanted to.
And we work with a pitch coach. She's been super helpful in helping us craft the story, but also helpful in the delivery, like what to do with your hands, where to stand, how to move about the stage, your intonation. One of the things she talks about a lot is how when you're giving your pitch, you want to like crescendo upwards, and a lot of people kind of do the opposite, or it's kind of a parabola where you like towards the end you lose steam because you're like, oh, I'm like through it, and that's important just to try to pick up your energy, especially at the end, so that you leave on a high note.
And investors are listening to so many pitches. It's so easy to zone out for 10 seconds, 20 seconds, and that's like a pretty substantial amount of the pitch. So if you can really slow down and emphasize the pieces that are really important, you'll capture their attention again. So they're not going to be asking you questions that you had already answered in your pitch, but they hadn't, like that means that they weren't listening, so that it wasn't captivating enough. And keeping your slides really simple, so not too much nice print is always what she says. Otherwise people are reading your slides and not listening to you.
Yeah, making sure your font's big enough to read quickly.
Yeah, I feel like we've come a long way with pitching, and it's really, it's nice to see the progression. I feel like we've gotten lots of good feedback recently.
Let's talk about, in my opinion, what the worst part of the week was, which was going over QuickBooks bookkeeping. It's so important, obviously, to the business. It's something that I don't like to do because it's boring to me, and I would have never been an accountant. But I think, like, Jess and I incorporated our business really early, and that was to help lay a groundwork, be able to get non-dilutive funding, be in a good place, have everything by the book, make sure that everything was split equally, that the business, revenue and costs were being allocated properly, business versus personal, etc. But I don't think what we did very well at the beginning was keep a record of those expenses in the right categories. And it's those kinds of things where, you just have to do a little bit up front, and then that makes it easier down the road. But just getting started with a system, which I don't think we did very well. So if anybody's listening and is looking to get started, I would make sure you do that as early as possible.
Yeah, I don't think we had QuickBooks for the first 2 years, and we didn't have as many expenses in the first 2 years, but it was still enough that it was difficult to keep track of later on. And then we filed 3 years all at the same time because we weren't profitable, obviously, so you can do that then. So then we did all 3 years at once because we were doing also our first shred claim, and maybe we did one filing before the shred claim. I think we did one. It was a bit of a mess though because we had to dig up so much information, and things were just in such weird places, and it took so much work to decipher everything. And then if you get anything wrong the next year, you have to reconcile journal entries. And anyway, bookkeepers, you can obviously do it yourself. Having something like QuickBooks is really helpful. Bookkeepers are also helpful, and you can bring them on for just a few hours each month, which isn't too much of a cost, or have somebody teach you. QuickBooks also has actually a really good little demo so that you can do it yourself. But yeah, it was interesting because I feel like we're getting to the point where we need to show everything we're saying verbally in our financials for the due diligence process. And it's something that we understand internally, but we haven't put on paper. And I think it is exciting to get to a more organized place. I really like organization and detail, so I like the idea of things actually matching. I feel like our financials have been so much in disarray that we don't even look at them. Not that we don't know what's going on high level. On a more granular scale, it's we do things in buckets, like our margin and our cost of goods sold. We have those in separate files versus that being actually captured on our P&L and cash flow.
And I think the other important thing with the big picture is that it allows you to make data-driven decisions. And if you're making those in silos of the different parts of the business, it's not going to be as good as the holistic part. And we were talking about that a bit last night because we were talking about customer acquisition cost and spending money on marketing. And the founder that had hosted us last night was the founder of Kits Eyewear, and they have a first pair free. And that's because the cost of giving somebody a free pair is cheaper than the cost of spending money on ads and, the traditional marketing. So their customer acquisition cost is the cost of a pair of glasses, and that makes sense in their P&L. So it's also looking holistically at the business and understanding, okay, what's your value proposition? How is that supporting your revenue? What can you do to bring people in, and how does that shape your entire profits? And looking at variable costs versus fixed costs, which for us has been a bit complicated because we have a lot of labor that's variable, since right now it's a manual process for each of the patterns. So it just really helps, I think, when you have everything set up and you're looking at it from a whole P&L perspective to make those decisions.
Yeah, and I think what was interesting last night was it was also said that not all companies have the opportunity to sample, to give
that's a good point.
Yeah, to give their product to somebody to try. And I feel like we've always looked at ourselves as not being able to do that because there's the barrier of somebody having to scan themselves before being able to receive the product. We can't just hand it out on the street, but we actually can sample. It's just a matter of that one extra step.
Yeah. His point is that if you have a business where the results aren't tangible, you can't say yes, this did, or no, this didn't do its function or live out its value prop, I find skincare is a bit on the fence because some
Yeah,
skincare you can't really
results.
see the results. Like it's a longer period of time,
Yeah.
but sometimes you can. So I think that's what makes something sampleable is can you understand the results right away or not?
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, because he'd made a good point about supplements and how, like, I mean, supplements is a funny one because it depends again. Like, if it's like an anti-bloating pill, theoretically you should be able to figure that out pretty quickly. But if it's like you're taking vitamin B every day, do you know if that's positively impacting you today, or do you need to wait 2 years of
Yeah.
taking it regularly?
And if it's just about the taste, then you're basically selling candy.
Yeah. So I think that was a really interesting unlock for us because we had never thought about our product in that way. So it's something that we're chewing on now.
Yeah. The other thing we've been also chewing on is our marketing messaging. And this week in particular, we were talking to people just candidly and talking about how part of what we like to do with the sizeless apparel that we're building is talk about how removing sizes also removes a bit of a stigma, and that a lot of people, women and men, have stigmas associated with sizing from just a societal expectation standpoint, numbers and things like that. And historically, actually, it's interesting because boomers, as they got older, so as you get older, your body composition changes, tends towards more fat. And as boomers got older and their bodies changed, they needed bigger sizes, and they didn't like that. And so there was pressure put on the apparel system to change the sizing. And so they actually shifted sizes up, or down, sorry. So it used to be a size 12,
Became a size 8.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's to say also that sizes are completely arbitrary and numbers don't mean anything, but numbers do tend to mean something because society tells you, you're a better woman if you're in a size 0. And so if you can get rid of sizes altogether and it's just you as you are, like obviously there's still ways that you can track how things fit but it's more against your own, like, oh, these clothes used to fit me and now they don't. And then it's just your new body and it come as you are. And, the clothing's made to you. It's not to a size. So there's something I think that's been resonating with a lot of people around that sentiment. And we just have to figure out what that sentence is that gets that across. Because you can't say it verbatim.
Yeah.
So it's how do you say it in a way that people get it without, that feeling is evoked.
Yeah. It reminds me so much of high school when because we grew up in the 2000s or 2010s, and like 00, like America's Next Top Model was so popular, and it was like the hyper thin era. And then I remember, learning about that sliding scale with retailers changing their sizes and how size 00 like hadn't existed until, size 4 had to become the 00. And it was such a, and I mean, speaking to bras too, on the opposite direction with bras, where you wanted to be that extra cup size, and you bought that triple padded bra that gave you 2 extra cup sizes. And it's like funny to think back in hindsight, but it was really impactful to your confidence and your self-esteem at the time.
And back to the messaging and subtleties around it, I was listening to the Acquired podcast, and they did an episode on Hermes, and they were talking about how at one point, it was in the 70s, that they wanted to really switch to be more youthful, and they didn't want it to feel like it was their grandmother's brand, but they didn't want to say, oh, this isn't your grandmother's brand, because then all the grandmothers that were shopping felt excluded. So they just started to show more of like a youthful look, and part of that was denim, because denim was becoming popular in the 70s, but obviously that was very generational, and so they started to show women wearing denim. And that also led to the Birkin bag, because Jane Birkin was very much like that denim wearing, kind of go with the flow woman of the 70s, and so she became a really great option for them, kind of the antithesis of a Grace Kelly. So then they could have the Kelly bag and the Birkin bag, and the Birkin bag was meant to replace like the straw bag she always carried around. And it's hard to know, these guys do their research really well, but it's, who knows how much stories get embellished over the years. But apparently she was sitting next to the founder of Hermes on a flight, and she couldn't fit her basket into the overhead compartment. And so anyway, that led to the Birkin bag, which obviously is so popular right now. So it was interesting, just the ideas of, figuring out what you want to say, how you can say it in a way that strikes a chord and isn't explicit, but still has that subliminal messaging.
Yeah,
And
there's
it's a hard thing.
so many moments in time where like people have struck gold, like and something's just blew up and it becomes like the most iconic item of that year or that generation. I had an interesting question too at the fireside chat. Somebody came up to me and asked about sustainable fashion and kind of what that future looks like. And I feel like this is something that we've thought about a lot. And I listened to an interesting podcast, speaking of podcasts, with the founder of Unspun, which is a company that we look up to quite a lot. It's a very similar concept to what we're doing, except within denim, and their innovation is largely in machinery and 3D knitting. But the whole concept is to, make the supply chain of apparel more sustainable and faster. And he's very focused on sustainability. That's like their main messaging. But he was like, it comes down to the fact that when you're doing deals with these huge retailers like the Walmarts and Zara's and H&M's of the world, if you're not cheaper or faster, like they're not picking you. Like sustainability matters, but like not really. And we see that in customers at the end of the day too, like where you want to believe that people care enough. And people are definitely changing their consumer habits slowly, but at the end of the day, like your wallet is probably going to dictate your choices. And when you're looking at, $100 t-shirt and a $20 t-shirt, like unless you have that extra cash, you may not make the sustainable choice. So I thought that was really interesting when he said like you need to be the most sustainable option and you need to give them no other choice because you need to be the best option in efficiency and in price and just be sustainable.
Yeah, I think we talked about that too on a previous episode about how people really are looking to be like they're smarter, richer, to borrow Maggie Seller's phrase. But people either want to look better, or they want to have more wealth, or they want to have more security or status. And so if you don't fall into either of those things, that's tough. And I think we feel that a bit too, where comfort, which is what we are delivering, doesn't always move the needle as fast as a different message in one of those three buckets would. And I think there's a bit of shifting that needs to happen with consumers around like, is being beautiful really important, or is your own comfort important, and that external versus internal factor. But so something we're still working on.
Because I think we feel it in price, where it's like, yes, theoretically, people should be willing to spend more on custom and comfort, but at the end of the day, they may not.
Yeah.
Right? But if you give them that option, custom comfort, at the same price as off-the-rack retail, then you'll for sure 100% be that choice. So it's sort of like, how can you unlock... Obviously, it's a lot of work to unlock all of those items, but it's not enough to like just be customizable or just be more comfortable. And maybe you'll have a smaller niche market, but you're not going to have a massive global impact necessarily.
We haven't done this in a while, but what was your snake and what was your ladder this week?
I feel like the BC Business 30 Under 30 dinner was definitely the latter. I feel like being in environments like that just feels so inspirational and exciting, and it reminds you how much impact you're trying to make and how much impact other entrepreneurs have. And it's just like, I love glamorous things as well, so I love being in a beautiful house and having a beautiful dinner. So that was definitely a highlight. My snake, what happened this week? It's been a pretty good week. I'm trying to think. I don't know if I have a snake for this week.
That's good. No setbacks.
I feel like it's mostly been positive. Maybe just like some cash flow stress, but nothing that comes to mind super strongly. What about you?
I'll give a different ladder, which was an investment company reached out to us this week, and we happen to have sent our quarterly investment update on Monday. So, you'll never know for sure what was the reason, but that feels pretty promising. We've been sending out these updates for I think 2 years now, and like continuously sending them out without much, like, maybe like our mentor Mel will send us like some nice emojis, and we get, or another one of our mentors, Shanda, usually sends a nice message, but otherwise, like, you don't know if anybody's reading them or they care, and so that was really nice to see. So we have a meeting set up with them, and then a snake. I think just a bit of the emotional regulation that you need as an entrepreneur around is similar to kind of to cash flow stress. you don't always have as much data as you want, especially when it comes to customers. We call all of our customers. They don't always answer the phone. We can't always, you don't always know if you're getting an honest answer. And so as much as you have, like, we probably have more data than most companies in terms of what our customers are looking for. Like, I really want to ask people, like, if you haven't reordered, why haven't you? And if you haven't told 5 friends, why haven't you? And it's hard to live in a world where you don't always have all those answers.
And I do feel like there's sometimes just like a mask of politeness where people really want to support you and they're excited for you, which is such a wonderful sentiment. And they don't necessarily want to tell you everything. I mean, we definitely get a mix. Like, I do think people have been overall honest, but I feel like to those questions specifically it would be really interesting, like what people would say, because I feel like they would feel uncomfortable potentially answering them, which sometimes blind anonymous feedback via email can be good for, but also people, I feel like, don't want to spend, hours writing reviews or writing feedback and things like that.
Yeah, so we're still trying to crack that nut. I think another snake, just to talk more on the personal side. So, I was very grateful and lucky to have got a house. I think I talked about that in a previous episode. Like, it was a bit of a hard time getting a house because of all the bidding wars in Toronto, and so really excited about that, but having a hard time getting a mortgage as an entrepreneur because they really look at, or we can get a mortgage, but getting a mortgage at a good rate because they look at salary, and I'm living off of savings, so I don't have a paycheck. Like, I can't show them 3 pay stubs. And when you're an entrepreneur, they want to look at 2 years and a 2-year average. So unless you've been working for yourself for 2 years, so in a bit of a weird place right now with that, which I think is just a good reminder to other entrepreneurs to figure things like that out. And you might need a bit more time to make sure that everything is working out, or you have to, you just don't get as good of a rate as if you had a corporate job, and that's another sacrifice that you have to take. Another one that's not relevant to us, but that I heard at a panel, was that if you want to take a mat leave as an entrepreneur, you have to, in Canada, you have to fill out an application 12 months before you want to take your mat leave. So that requires a lot of pre-planning, obviously, since babies only incubate for 9 months, or sometimes 10. So yeah, just sometimes those extra admin things as an entrepreneur, and it can feel like a bit of a setback, on top of the fact that you're maybe not getting a paycheck.
Yeah, totally fair.
And then I guess to circle back on a positive note, it's the long weekend coming up, and I think we're both going to try to take a day or two, and not really work, which I think will be a nice reset. So also kind of the flexibility is always nice too, to be able to kind of pick and choose when we're working and when we're not. On this trip, being able to go for walks when we want to, and not have to worry about kind of like clocking in 9 to 5. So
yeah, the flexibility is definitely a perk. And I feel like, for entrepreneurs listening, making sure you're taking advantage of that, because I feel like that hasn't always been the case, and it can be really easy to make yourself stick to hours that you're only reinforcing yourself.
It's very much flexibility versus stability.
Yeah, 100%.
Okay, well, we'll end on that note. Thanks for listening.
See you next week.
Building something new, whether it's a business brand or a personal brand, is always a journey.
We appreciate you tuning in to the Double Digest. If this episode resonated with you, let us know with a review, share with a friend, and subscribe to keep up with more behind the scenes and real talk.
See you next Monday.